The Hague Initiative for International Cooperation.
A very important
Almost every language
the Israel Institute of New Zealand.
My roots come from Jerusalem.
Kia ora, shalom, welcome. I'm Dr David Cumin for the Israel Institute of New Zealand, and we're very privileged to have Dr Mike Doran here with us. Dr Doran is a PhD from Princeton in Near East Studies. He worked with the George W. Bush administration, and he's now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Thank you for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
We wanted to get into issues related to Israel. Obviously, you're deep into the analysis of that and the American approach to Israel. And what we've seen over the last little while is Trump has taken quite a different approach in many respects. And if we start to talk with possibly the most controversial step that he's recently taken, and that is to recognize sovereignty over the Golan Heights. What's the significance of that?
I think it was a great step myself, personally, and I think it was long overdue. Everybody knows that the Israelis are not going to give up the Golan, especially since the Syrian civil war, and we see all the violence in Syria, the instability. There's no possibility that that is going to end anytime soon. Even if a regime came to power in Damascus that was reasonably stable, reasonably pro-American, pro-Western, capable of respecting the minimal rights of its own population, and it wanted the Golan back, I don't see how the Israelis could give it back, and I don't see how the United States or the rest of the world should encourage them to give it back, because you simply cannot trust anyone who's running the government in Damascus, not because they might not be wonderful people, but because the foundation there is very unstable. And right now, if the Israelis were to return the Golan to Syria, we'd have Iranians on the Golan Heights looking down the sights of their rifles at Israeli cities and towns below, and at Jordanian towns and cities below as well. I mean, remember, the Golan looks not just on Israel, but on Jordan. So it would be a recipe for instability.
So is Jordan pleased about the announcement from the States then?
I think that the Arab countries are obligated to protest the acquisition of by Israel of any territory, but in their hearts they much prefer to see it in the hands of Israel than in the hands of the Syrians.
Well, it seems like a very pragmatic way of looking at the situation, and certainly the landscape shows that it's strategically important from a military perspective, as you've described. But what about the underlying international law? There are some people that say that Israel shouldn't have it because international law says that you can't acquire land by force.
I don't think that international law says that. I mean, what's the purpose of that prohibition, which people repeat all the time? The purpose is to prevent countries from launching aggressive wars. But Israel was the target of 3 aggressive wars by the Syrians. And that's how they ended up taking the Golan, because it gave them an advantage. So it acted, when the Golan Heights was in the hands of the Syrians, it promoted instability, and it incentivized the Syrians to attack the Israelis. I think that's what we should be focusing on.
And I get the distinction that's sometimes made is an aggressive war and a defensive war, and I think that's one of the things that you've just drawn out.
Exactly, the Israelis are defensive. And by the way, what the Syrians have demanded is that the Israelis return all of the territory that they took in 1967 from the Syrians. But that territory included territory that the Syrians took in 1948. From what was mandated Palestine. So a return of the territory that the Israelis took in 1967 to the Syrians would give the Syrians territory that they took by force. So if you're going to say that the principle is you can't have territory by force, then you can't be in favor of Israel giving it back to the Syrians.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And what about the UN relationship in all of this? Because there's at least 3 resolutions that come up every year talking about the Golan in some way or another, and New Zealand has abstained on one and voted for the other 2, which essentially say that Israel has no rights to that land. I don't know how the US has voted, but I think that they reject those sort of resolutions.
Look, why are we holding in escrow for the Syrian government, which has, together with the Iranians and the Russians, has murdered about 1 million people? It has driven 12 million from their home. Half the population of Syria, nearly half the population of Syria, has been driven out of its homes by this regime. Why are we holding this territory in escrow for this regime? I mean, at what point do we say, you know, you have forfeited your right to have this territory? What's wrong with saying that? It makes perfect sense, logically.
And that's what Trump's done.
Yeah.
Speaking of Iran, he's also designated the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist entity. And that seems like quite an extreme step. It's something that the Gulf and Arab states have applauded in this case. What's the significance of that latest move?
Well, it is a terror entity. I mean, the Revolutionary Guard is the part of the Iranian military that Iran uses to project its power all across the Arab world. It's building up these terrorist militias in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. It's giving them rockets and missiles and drone technology so that it can subvert the regional order. So it makes perfect sense logically to do that, but it also is damaging to the Iranian economy. Because the Revolutionary Guard Corps has a very big role in the Iranian private sector. I mean, if you can call it that. There's no such thing as the distinction between private and public in Iran is difficult to, the line is difficult to identify, precisely because the Revolutionary Guard Corps has, behind the scenes, taken over a lot of industries that to Westerners on the face of it look like they're private, but they're not actually. Mm-hmm. So it's an announcement to the private sector in the West. Be careful when you're doing business with Iranian private entities, because behind them may be the hidden hand of the Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Which is now a terrorist organization in the eyes of the United States.
Right, exactly.
And that potentially has impact for us in New Zealand. I wonder if you would comment on the fact that New Zealand has been a very strong supporter of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, and has looked to try and re-establish trade links. There's still a New Zealand embassy in Tehran, for example. What kind of an impact does this designation and uncovering all of this have potentially for New Zealand?
Well, anybody who wants to do business with Iran should think twice should look very closely into who it is they're doing business with, because you never know whether it's actually a private individual or somebody in the Revolutionary Guard. So they need to be very careful. And basically, it's just a signal that to everyone in New Zealand. The American move is a signal to everyone that you can do business with the Revolutionary Guard or you can do business with America, but you can't do business with both. So everybody needs to make their calculation.
Speaking of the differentiation between public and private, there's also been a split between designating Hezbollah as the military wing as a terrorist organisation, but not the political wing. And the UK a little while ago followed in the steps of the United States and said we're going to stop that loophole, so to speak. New Zealand hasn't. Can you give us some reasons why that loophole is a loophole and not a legitimate distinction?
Well, it isn't a legitimate distinction because I don't think any serious analyst of Hezbollah thinks that it has two different wings. I mean, it's a vulture with two wings, but they're connected to the same beast. It's one malevolent organization, and it's absolutely crucial to what we call the Hezbollah model that Iran is using to project its power in the Arab world. They're building up all of these militias under the noses of legitimate governments, and like I said, arming them, training them, equipping them, giving them strategic guidance. And Hezbollah is the agent of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in that effort, because it was built up by Iran, but it's Arab, so it's a kind of natural liaison for the Iranians with their Arab proxies. So we need to designate it along with the Revolutionary Guard.
Well, I hope New Zealand follows suit and does close that loophole.
So do I. I don't understand why they've done it. It's something that governments do when, for one reason or another, they want to keep up the connection with the Iranians, not because they actually believe the distinction. All serious people know that the distinction comes from a political motivation rather than a serious analysis of the situation.
One of the other things that Trump has done that's been a little bit controversial, but is now a little bit in the past, is acknowledged that at least West Jerusalem is part of Israel. There was a lot of talk at the time about uprisings and violence in the streets because of it, and none of that seems to have happened. Do you think the dust has truly settled on that and there's acknowledgement, or do you think there's still a battle to be had?
Well, there's still a battle to be had in that other governments haven't followed suit. But I think that all of the dire predictions about violence ensuing and disruption and protests in the streets of the Arab world was wildly exaggerated. We all said that at the time. The same thing is true about the Golan Heights as well. A number of people said it's going to lead to instability, or it's going to lead to all of the Arab states rallying around Assad. None of this is going to happen. Everyone with a brain knows that the Golan Heights are going to remain forever in the hands of the Israelis, and everybody knows that under whatever possible scenario, under whatever possible peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians, Jerusalem is going to be the capital of Israel. Nobody denies that. So why shouldn't it be the capital of Israel now?
Well, the Palestinians say that they deny it. They're looking to have Jerusalem as their capital, and there's been political pushback to that.
Well, in any peace agreement, any blueprint for peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, the assumption has been that West Jerusalem will remain in the hands of the Israelis. And there's nothing about recognizing Jerusalem as the capital that prevents the Israelis from giving a piece of Jerusalem to the Palestinians.
So there is still hope for people who think that there will be a two-state solution with Jerusalem as a capital of both.
It doesn't prejudge the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital doesn't prejudge anything.
Well, thank you very much for coming and talking with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
That's Dr. Michael Doran, and I'm Dr. David Cumin for the Israel Institute of New Zealand. The Hague Initiative for International
A
Cooperation.
very important word
Almost every language
Israel
other than
Institute of New Zealand.
My roots come from Jerusalem.